Today's episode of Monologues is brought to you by You Home, who we'll be hearing more about later in the show. Hello, my name is Oliver Logue, and this is Monologues. It's July the 1st as I record this, and across Brighton summer is in full swing. This month's episode is all about summer in Brighton, the characters, the festivals, the way that life just seems more vibrant, busy. Each May, the Brighton Fringe takes over many of the parks and pubs across the centre of town, bringing with it hundreds of shows across comedy, theatre and dance. Our first story tonight is inspired by the unique characters of the Fringe and the many ways that our creaking structures pervert art to further their goals. It's called Dignitaries, and I hope you enjoy it. Chloe Attrell had attended the Brighton Fringe several times before, but this was her first time as a performer. A London native, she was spending 3 weekends sleeping on a friend's sofa and performing her one-woman show, Super Woman, in the upstairs room of the Joker. The show, described as a hilarious new comedy show about the thing that men fear the most, a powerful woman, saw Chloe's character performing an array of heroic acts, only to see her achievements overshadowed by the decidedly un-supermen in her life, with her attempts to call attention to this disparity generating criticism of her as bossy, shrill, a bitch. The more she achieved, the more it seemed that men disliked her. Super Woman ended with Chloe's character retreating to a sapphic parody of the Fortress of Solitude called The Fortress of No More Dudes. It was approximately 55 minutes long, and this day, the first Sunday of the festival, there were 9 people in the audience. The room was small and dark, and thanks to the lighting it was difficult for her to see anyone in the audience with any particular clarity. If she could have seen the members of the audience, she would have seen polite smiles, tapping feet, eyes that darted to wristwatches and the door, and a man, sat alone at the back of the room, occasionally pausing to make a note on a small legal pad. He was wearing a trim shirt and dark glasses, with a tan hat resting on his lap. He was somewhere between 35 and 40. He was tall, in good shape, with a faded scar just about visible on his right hand. His name was most assuredly not Henry. "Hi Chloe, I emailed you a few days ago. Henry Fielding," he said, thrusting out his hand and shaking hers. They were stood at the top of the stairs, the rest of the audience having left. "Oh, it's lovely to meet you," Chloe said, wiping the sweat from her brow. "Did you enjoy the show?" "I loved it," he said. "It's just what we're looking for. You've got such a unique voice, and such a timely message." A few hours later, the man whose name was not Henry was in a different room, above a different pub. The Quadrant, to be exact, watching the show, Doctor Who'sical, the improvised Doctor Who musical. On the row in front of him, a man carefully retrieved his phone from his pocket, leaning it at such an angle that his partner couldn't see it, and texting a WhatsApp group called Ketty Dan's Incontinence Pants, the message, "I'm in hell and I'm being punished for my sins." A few minutes later he repeated the maneuver, messaging, "I'm giving it another 5 minutes before I beat each member of the cast to death with a hammer." Across the weekends, the man whose name was not Henry was ignored, glanced over, and otherwise passively observed at a huge variety of fringe events. If people had paid slightly more attention, they would have seen that there were running themes in the shows he was attending. Musicals, often improvised, single-person shows, shows that use words like powerful within their marketing materials. And if they would have followed him back to his hotel, and somehow slipped into his room, or perhaps placed some sort of tiny monitoring device within it, they'd have heard the way his voice changed from lethargic, slangy, warm, to cold, staccato. How he often simply said, "Yes, sir," or "No, sir," throughout his phone conversations. how he read slowly from a large hardback history book, scribbling unreadable notes in the columns as he went, how he fastidiously cleaned and hung his clothes, repeatedly making use of the hotel's dry cleaning services, how he wore both earplugs and an eye mask to sleep, aided by a trio of pills stored within a weekly box, how, in all sorts of ways, his outward self in Brighton was the complete opposite of his private self. Chloe was not an observant person. When she described the events of that Sunday afternoon to her boyfriend, her friends, and her colleagues, she had no doubts about the man she'd spoken to and his offer. The email described it as a talent incubation program run with government funding to shepherd in the next wave of UK writers and performers, and Chloe was ecstatic, making plans for the next steps in what promised to be a glittering career. She was so ecstatic, so excited, that when she heard the travel arrangements, she didn't give them a second thought. A formality, not Henry said, as he tightened the bag over her head in the back of the blacked-out car. They were heading towards an airport that was unacknowledged, to board a plane that was officially parked halfway across the country, to travel to a military base that didn't exist. But Chloe saw little to question in the narrative presented to her, nothing to quibble in her upcoming performance to an audience of VIPs. In the windowless airport hangar, she greeted the cast of Doctor Who'sical alongside a man named Keith, who explained that he was working on a one-man comedy show inspired by his work as an accountant. They drank champagne on the 5-hour flight, swapping stories, practicing, even breaking into a sing-along at one point. Everyone on board was very excited by the opportunity presented to them, so excited that the windowless plane, the small island they landed on, and the converted military bunks that were to be their rooms didn't arouse even the smallest hint of suspicion. A kilometre or so away, 2 men, one of whom was not called Henry, were crouched in a dark room, staring at a wooden rabbit's hutch, which was shaking and cracking. Cannibal Corpse was playing from a large speaker behind them, and one of them turned, idly switching it off. "Hello, Pascal," he said, tapping on the roof of the hutch. Not Henry opened the latch and let the door swing open, staring at the raw skin of a man's back, a shaved head. "Out you come, Pascal," he said. "It's time to get you cleaned up. We got a very special treat for you today." They went from room to room, finding Pierre, Jean-Luc, and Alain. Each man was manacled and led to a communal shower, where they were sprayed with an industrial hose to remove the shit that was caked to their legs and bums. Chloe was practicing tongue twisters in the small dressing room when Not Henry knocked at the door. "Hi, Chloe," he said. "The dignitaries have arrived and they're waiting for the show, but we've had some issues with the tech setup for the other guys. I know it's last minute, but you told me that you actually had to cut lots of stuff out. Would you be able to extend the show?" Chloe stepped out onto the stage. There was a spotlight shining in her eyes that made it difficult to see the small audience with any particular clarity. After pausing to take a breath, she launched into her show. There were a few things that threw her off: the polite, muffled laughter that followed each joke, the rigid posture of each audience member, the coldness of the room. But she persevered, expanding the show to nearly 90 minutes by reinstating several subplots and digressions that had been excised from the fringe version. Towards the end, something in the lights seemed to dim, just for a moment, and she swore that she noticed a wet patch underneath one of the chairs. But then the glare was back, and she told herself that she must have imagined it. I'd like to take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's episode, UHome. UHome is the latest in luxury housing, combining cutting-edge design with a boho charm that is all Brighton. Built around a lush private garden alongside a suite of brand new bars, shops, and restaurants, it's the perfect location for remote workers or those commuting to London. Each unit is equipped with the latest in AI enhancements and built with sustainability in mind, with recycled insulation and a generous replanting system helping us reach our goal of carbon neutrality by 2040. With 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units starting at only £400,000, your UHome can be purchased in full or part purchased with residents able to secure their location by committing to as little as 25% of the property. Revel in the eccentricities of Brighton with gourmet food, alternative music and comedy, and fantastic nightlife. Speak to a representative about joining you home today. I think stories are an amazing way to take a listener on a journey, or to capture my complicated feelings on a topic. But when it comes to summer, in Brighton or otherwise, much of what I wanted to convey was a feeling, a vibe. So, instead of characters and plots, for our next segment I'm going to take you on a journey across a summer's day in Brighton. I hope you enjoy it. I wake up in my girlfriend's room, awkwardly stepping over her to get out of bed and go for a pee. It's a Saturday, sunny, clearish sky, the odd little cloud bobbing along. I lie in bed reading my phone for an hour while she rolls around, occasionally hugging me or saying something cryptic in Assamese. We eat breakfast together in her front room, watching the last hour of a Tom Cruise film I've not seen before. We've been watching a lot of Tom Cruise films recently. When we're done, I grab my stuff and leave, heading down to the level and past my old flat. I wonder who got tricked into living there after us, how bad the mould was for them over the winter. I thought before leaving about hiding a note somewhere explaining the damp issues, but decided against it because I thought there was a chance my landlady would find it, and because I really wanted my deposit back. There's an assortment of people within the level, 30-somethings walking dogs or pushing babies, groups of smelly-looking circus types wobbling along a slack line, teenagers in grey exercise tops and fascist haircuts. 2 men on a bench are blasting music from a speaker and passing a 2-litre bottle of cider between them. From the park you can see St. Peter's Church and the grey or brown towers that rival it within the Brighton skyline. I cross up to the back entrance of the station, sidestepping a homeless congregation engaged in some sort of turf war to duck into Sainsbury's, where I buy an £8 bottle of balsamic vinegar and a punnet of nectarines. The station is empty, this grand skeleton of a building. A young woman is leaning against the coffee stand with a straw tote bag reading, "Making small changes to save the planet," and I'm reminded that, at some undetermined point along the coast, a sewage pipe is currently blasting 1,000 gallons of turd slurry into the ocean. Behind her 8 blue screens read, "This machine charges $1.99 for cash withdrawals." There are a few worse for wears people on the benches outside the station, some still going from the night before, some just getting started. I'm reminded of a story I heard recently, about a friend of a friend who'd posted a photo online of a bundle of bedding and rucksacks outside of the Fitness First, with the caption, "Rate my setup," before dying of a fentanyl overdose that evening. His parents were attempting to get the post removed before the funeral. Once home I do my stretches. I was supposed to be competing in the Brighton Marathon in April, but a couple of weeks beforehand, on mile 12 of my final practice run, my knee imploded, and since then I've been eking out the slow journey to recovery, watching my stamina essentially reset to zero and my waistband expand by an inch or two all within a couple of months, which has been a fairly dispiriting process. I'm running with a brace on now, and today I decide to go further, to push towards 5 miles, which would have been trifling in March but now registers as a steep challenge. As I'm leaving the flat I put in my headphones and cue up my running playlist, which when shuffled produces some fairly galling style shifts, old indie songs giving way to trap bangers giving way to hyperpop. A woman who can't be older than 19 walks past me and I hear her say, "Contract dispute," before the opening of Debaser by the Pixies drowns her out. I run towards the seafront at a measured pace. I use the same coastal routes every time I run, adding or subtracting sections to adjust the distance. Some people who I've described this to see it as maddeningly dull, but it helps me to regulate, monitor, and assess without having to resort to much in the way of conscious thought. Not that I can really turn my brain off. The seafront is heaving, day trippers from across the south mingling with the vast numbers of tourists and the buses of students from Spain, France, and Germany. I cross out onto Madeira Drive, ducking and weaving through the crowds as I run along the pavement. I continue down to the marina, where I pass the Asda, my vote for the worst supermarket chain. I find myself slowing down on the way back, running for a few minutes, then walking for 30 seconds or so at a time. I pass the hotel that mysteriously caught fire a couple of years back, which has this big tarpaulin advert on it that I won't be shilling here. While every advert in London mentions that you're in London, something which I feel is usually apparent, only a few ads in Brighton mention location, and they're uniformly awful. It's normally some shade of, "You are by the sea," or "You are gay," followed by, "Buy this thing," usually some sort of expensive non-dairy drink that will gradually, over the course of, say, 40 years or so, give you something really bad, or an app that charges a monthly subscription for something that should be free. I try to refocus on the run, but I'm distracted by another ad at the bus stop by Chalk, which reads, "Take the hunt to Tesco's." I slow even more, walking the final climb back to my flat. Underneath the station, groups of parents and children are leaving some sort of event called Dreamy Place, while a homeless man sits motionless outside, head slumped, like one of those frozen climbers they use as a signpost on Everest. I pause by the station to make a note of this thought on my phone. I arrive worn, sweating, but thankfully my knee is held out. I shower quickly, then head down into town. I have lunch with my friend Callum in the North Lanes, eating an overpriced sandwich on a small table within the street. Callum, who is considering moving to Brighton, talks about fate, extraterrestrial life, his protein regimen, and the various issues of the day. We talk about the communist organisations attempting to recruit members in Brighton at the moment, and how their approach seems to largely consist of putting stickers on things. I'm too sceptical to really track with something so rigid and musty and, dare I say it, silly, but the swiftness with which I pass a kind of lofty, dismissive judgment over young people espousing such views is probably misguided. I can be a bit uncharitable at times, I think. I say goodbye to Callum, heading home to write. My room is spacious and bright, and if you open all the windows there's a good breeze through it, although from my chair the view of Brighton remains obstructed by the scaffolding. I write for 2 50-minute bursts, taking a 30-minute break in between to drink a tea and read Giovanni's room on the scaffolding, looking out over the city and the sea. I jog down to Audi to grab something quick for dinner. I eat in my bed watching 5 minutes of a Netflix documentary about the Vietnam War. I put a jacket on before heading out. At the bottom of the hill, a weirdly sedated woman is crouched over her own vomit by one of the BT video boards, while her friend hovers over her, gently stroking her hair. I pass a woman wearing a t-shirt that reads, "Future MILF." I pass a woman wearing a t-shirt that reads, "I fucking love sertraline." I pass a poster for a missing dog, a Great Dane called Buster. I've got my headphones in and I'm listening to Sea Swallow Me by the Cocteau Twins, watching a Burger King helmet blowing around the War Memorial. I look down into the road, seeing a pigeon that's been obliterated by a car. Its upper torso this image of composed horror while its legs and back transition into this drapery of guts. It's 7:30 and the town centre is starting to fill. The pubs are full of people my age and older, well on their way to pissed, while the younger clubbers are still drinking at home and won't be seen out for many hours. I'm joining my parents for a concert, which is something that used to fill me with embarrassment, but doesn't really bother me now. We're seeing MJ Lenderman and I'm sweating within minutes of the OK support act taking the stage. I grab a round of pints, slipping in the in-ear noise-suppressing headphones I've worn at concerts religiously ever since Fat White Family gave me tinnitus for 6 months a few years back. I look around the crowd, and it's mostly people aged 30 to 60, with a few slightly younger people dotted towards the front. The gig is fun, though they seem a bit out of it, but I become preoccupied with the body language of the couple in front of me to the point of distraction towards the end. The man keeps locking his hand on the back of his girlfriend's neck like a dog picking up pups. In general, he seems to be quite aggressively positioning her, grabbing her and moving her at certain points. I wonder if he's drunk. I wonder if it's all fine and I'm just imagining things. Sometimes I find it thrilling to live in a world so alive with complications, and sometimes the noise of it all just overwhelms me, and I worry that I'll never escape it. After the gig is over, I walk through Brighton at night. It's 10-something, the sun is gone, and North Street is full of people, all drunk, many stumbling and shouting. It's starting to cool and I'm fairly underdressed, crossing groups of drunk girls heading towards nightclubs, doorways where men gather around a pipe that I presume is a crack pipe, past couples shouting, a woman flailing a leopard print handbag and screaming enough at a man whose red face looks like one of those watermelons they grow to be cuboid. A man wearing a sash that reads, "One vagina for life," is asleep at the bus stop, and 3 teens are taking photos with him, balancing their cardboard fried chicken boxes on his head. In my room I look out at the glowing roof of the train station, the tower blocks climbing the hill, the hospital at the helipad, the sweep of the sea to my right. Brighton in summer is a lot of things. Things I like, things I find interesting, things that annoy me, things that I find upsetting or stifling. I often find myself held at quite a distance by it, but I do feel at home here, in some sort of way. We're going to finish today's episode by reading a letter from one of our listeners. I'd like to thank everyone who took the time to write in this month. I'd have loved to have used everything, but I just didn't have the time. Today's letter is from Dawn. Dear Oliver, I saw that you were making an episode about summer in Brighton, and I thought I'd write in. My husband Derek and I moved into the U-Home development at the beginning of the year. We'd been trying to get our own place for a while, but were struggling to find anything that wasn't a shoebox for our budget. We ended up doing a part ownership deal. I won't bore you with the details, but we bought 49% of the flat with a mortgage and are renting the other 51%. It's saving us money, just about. The U-Home brochure was promising all these new features in a bit of a shopping area, bars, restaurants, a kind of hub away from the centre of town. It wasn't a great deal, but we were done with renting. One of the things that made it really clear it was time to move was the spate of pet disappearances last summer. Our neighbour's cocker spaniel, Biscuit, had been snatched from their home in the night, locked doors, no disturbances, and they never got him back, no ransom, and they were checking all the shelters, private listings. It was very stressful for them. We had our own dog, a lovely golden retriever called Tudor, and the thought of something happening to him was horrifying to me. So we took the deal on U-Home, borrowed Derek's father's van, and moved everything in. We were in the western part of the U-Home complex, overlooking the gardens they were supposed to be building, though it was little more than a gravel square at that point. That was a running theme. The shared social spaces were all either a building site or an empty unit. It was quite sinister, at night especially, these empty restaurants with the tables and chairs laid out, empty bars, empty shops, shelves with nothing on them, brightly lit walkways with no one using them. Derek and I joked that we were the only people living in a U-Home, but truly there can't have been more than half a dozen units that had people in them. I don't think there was anyone else in our building. The flat below ours was furnished. I think it was an exhibition flat, and I could see this table and chairs on the balcony below ours. It was quite ghoulish. Almost immediately we felt that there was something going on, or not going on, just that it was clear things weren't what we'd been sold. We were expecting the flats to fill up, and that wasn't happening at all. Months were passing and we didn't see anyone, and the restaurants and bars sat empty. The flat was actually quite spacious for a new build. A lot of them are basically designed by arseholes, and it's like living in a submarine. But this had a decent roof height, bedrooms with space to breathe, balconies, separate kitchens. We had space in the lounge for a dining room and the sofa and TV. We ended up sending an email to the sales rep we'd bought the flat through, just being like, is there something that's putting people off? And what's going on with the shared spaces? We weren't thinking that it was a scam or anything. They'd built maybe 80% of the stuff already. It was just empty. And we got this extremely strange response, making all these promises that just didn't ring true, but it was written in such a feverish tone, with barely a full stop across its paragraphs. The one room we were having issues with was our bedroom. It had a smell that was here and there in the winter. Some days you'd get it and others not. But as things started to warm, it became more pronounced. It was kind of musty, but sweet, not like damp. We thought it might be something to do with the new build, something that would settle over time, but it was really making it difficult to sleep at points. We'd have the extractor on, all the windows open, and sometimes it would be just about tolerable, and sometimes it would keep tapping on my mind, this maddening little thought I couldn't shift. I work in retail, high-end jewellery, a decent living honestly, but the hours can be quite antisocial. When I lived in the centre of Brighton, I had roads I'd walk on and roads I avoided, and sometimes I'd call Derek when walking back via somewhere sketchy. But for the new place, for you home, the final part of my walk would be through this empty development, with beaming lights over the path and hundreds of dark windows around me. That's when I first saw him, the teenager. He was standing outside one of the empty restaurants, just bathed in light. They'd erected this facade of a sign saying Carlucci's, which was quite bizarre because there was no restaurant. The sign had been there for months. There was just this fake sign hanging over an empty prefab building. I noticed this man standing there. I hadn't twigged his age at that point, and I had this thought immediately of, he's going to follow me. I can be quite a catastrophizer, but I remember very distinctly walking along the path and watching him, this voice in my head screaming that he was going to follow me, that he was going to try and do something, but he didn't. There was a small parking area to the end of the U-Home compound, and the next morning we found that someone had carved pedo into the side of our car. Derek's a teacher, so he was obviously very upset about the whole thing. There were only a few cars there, so potentially it could have been random, but it felt intentional. The next time I saw the man again, this time he was closer, standing in the gravel square outside our flats, with his phone out in front of him. I had the impression he was filming me. Derek told me that he'd come and meet me every evening from then on. We'd see him together after that, always with his phone out, filming us. One time Derek went over to confront him and he said that this teenager, maybe 15 or 16, was looking straight through him. He thought he might be on drugs or something. It was then that I started to think that the car keying was him. We spoke to the U-Home people about all of this and they sent this copy-paste response that had nothing to do with our question. And the smell was getting worse in the bedroom. Tudor would go into it and bark at the wall. We'd have to drag him back out and close the door. I was really starting to worry about this teenager, who he was, what he wanted. Derek said he was probably the child of one of the other unfortunates who'd bought a U-Home flat, but I wasn't sure. One day in May, the two of us were taking Tudor for a walk, and we saw him waiting by the exit, this metal arch that separated the busy world of the outdoors from the apocalyptic desolation of U-Home. He was wearing this thick grey hoodie pulled up, and had his phone out, as if he'd anticipated us. Derek said something which he ignored, as if he hadn't heard it, but when Tudor started barking at him, he suddenly launched into this shouted babble that I didn't recognise, but Derek later informed me appeared to be fluent Latin. His private education occasionally rears its head. He kept saying, Supplicia Canum. When he was finished ranting, he turned and ran back into the U-Home complex. Things had soured quite quickly, and it was around this time that we started talking about our options. The smell was getting worse, and various figures had stopped responding to our emails or picking up our calls. We spoke to a lawyer who charged us hundreds of pounds for what essentially amounted to a 20-minute shrug. We'd signed, we'd paid, we were trapped. It feels foolish to write this down, but it felt like the flat was getting smaller, that the ceilings were lower, that there was less space to move about, that the sofa and the dining table were now touching, that the balcony barely fitted its table and chairs. The teenager had disappeared, and for whatever reason this made me more nervous, more convinced that something terrible was about to happen. Tudor was barking in our room more and more, was pawing at the door when we closed it, was jumping on the bed and near clawing at the wall. The smell was worsening as the heat increased, this awful decaying aroma. I started to think that something might have become trapped in the wall during the building process. We spoke about getting someone to open the wall up, but after raising this with the U-Home team, were told that, as they had a controlling stake in the flat, they had ultimate control over what could be done to it, and that they wouldn't sanction our request. This was the first communication we'd had from them in weeks, and was followed soon after by a visit from this twitching, uncomfortable-looking man who looked me dead in the face and denied that he could smell anything wrong, while Derek and I stood by him, retching. Someone keyed the car again, this time writing, and when Derek saw it, something snapped in him. We had a big row about things, about the flat, whose decision it had been to move in, what we were going to do. Both of us wanted to run away, I think. The heat was rising and the smell was unbearable. I started sleeping on the sofa, but even then I could still smell it. A week ago, near enough 6 months from moving in, Derek returned home with a crowbar, walking into the bedroom without saying anything to me. Tudor followed him, barking incessantly. I followed further behind, worried more than anything. The drywall was thin and cheap and crumbled from the first solid hit of the crowbar, a big circle appearing. The smell burst through and I fell to my knees and vomited on the floor. Derek held his mouth and nose and pulled away more and more of the plasterboard. There was a darkness behind the wall, and he reached in and pulled something through, this black sack flopping onto the bed. The smell was unbearable. I blinked and saw a dark brown lump nearly the size of me, then noticed what appeared to be a festering leg. Derek vomited. I watched it leaking through his fingers as he stared at the thing lying on our bed. When you're in a situation like that, it can take time to acclimatize, for your brain to make sense of the images being beamed into it. It was a Great Dane, large, adult. It appeared to have been shrink-wrapped, though there must have been breaks in the seal, as multiple parts of it were in the process of decomposition. Derek swung his arm and pulled down more of the plasterboard, revealing further black shapes inside the wall, the smell building into a cacophony. We moved out onto the balcony, dazed, horrified. I hadn't noticed that the barking had stopped. When you're in a situation like that, you don't notice the details. But I saw him again, the teenager, down in the gravel square that was meant to be our park, running towards the sea with Tudor under his arm. I screamed and screamed, but he kept running. Thank you to Dawn for your lovely letter, and thank you, dear listener, for your patronage. I'm Oliver Logue, and this has been Monologues.